Hello and welcome to another episode of Patrick Replies, the show where I, Patrick, reply to your questions and comments about the latest video. And today, we're doing a travel episode. You can see I'm in a hotel room with weird concrete walls, which I guess is trendy or something. But anyway, I'm on the road and we are discussing the Streets of Fire episode. An episode that is about a movie that has never been popular outside of with a small cult audience, and somehow outperformed the Jaws episode, which is about one of the most popular movies ever made. YouTube is weird. You really can't predict how things are gonna go or what things people are gonna click on and enjoy. And it also turned out that this video happens to I made it right around the 40th anniversary of Streets of Fire, which I didn't realize was happening. So I released the video, and then a week or two later, suddenly everyone online is talking about Streets of Fire. Hideo Kojima is talking about how much he loves Streets of Fire, and I was like, oh, well, I look ahead of the curve, and that was purely accidental. But anyway, right now, we're gonna talk about what you all said about the video. So let me grab the iPad. And as always, we will start with the comments pulled from the YouTube comments section by our own Emma Logsdon, who we all love so much. So let's see what Emma selected. We have a comment from Legal Eagle. Devin's back again. Probably gonna complain about something I did wrong. Illegal Eagle says, typical Patrick, just jumping on the Streets of Fire bandwagon and making the same tired points as all the other video critics on the platform. It's true. Look, I have really run out of things to say. I have no original ideas anymore. I'm just talking about Streets of Fire because it's trendy and everyone's doing it these days. Everyone's got to make their Streets of Fire video. Yeah, Devin, you got me. Alexander McGregor, and he says, hi, Patrick and Emma. Thank you for another wonderful video. Thank you for watching. I've been a fan of the channel for years, and I'm so impressed with its growth in scope, themes, and voice. I'm especially impressed with how you also create a space for your repertory of collaborators to grow and find their voice too. Thank you. That is so great to hear, and I obviously love working with our whole team, who I think are the best. The only thing better than great work is great work that uplifts people. Now on to my question. Do you know the German language rock opera, gonna butcher this, Tanz der Vampir? It's Jim Steinman's stage musical version of The Fearless Vampire Hunters, which features versions of Total Eclipse and Tonight Is What It Means to Be Young. Trust me, Patrick, you have not heard these songs until you've heard them in the original German. So is there a video where you travel to a Berlin theater to experience your favorite ever song for a movie live, and in German, as if you were on the dance floor in that crowd at the end of Streets of Fire? So, again, I don't speak any German at all. I'm very sorry to our German viewers here. So, Tanz der Vampir, whatever. I am aware of it. I know it exists. I've heard about it, and I know that Tonight Is What It Means to Be Young is in that musical. I've never seen it. I would totally be down to see it, even though I don't speak German and would not understand, what anyone was saying outside of the songs where I already know the English lyrics. I will say I would not count on a video where I go to Berlin to see the show, because I'm not sure how good a video that would be. I can't film the show, obviously. So it would be a thing where I travel to Berlin, and so it's kind of like a Berlin travel vlog, and I'm like, well, camera off, time to watch the show. And then I watch the show, and then I come back and I'm like, well, that was fun. It was cool to see them perform a song that I like. That's the end. I don't know if there's a video there, unless it were a larger video just about, I don't know, I go to Germany to learn about German cinema. And then there's a brief little 2-minute part where I go to see that show. That could be fun. On this whole European trip, I did not go to Germany. Didn't go to Germany. Did go to Switzerland, where people speak a lot of German. That's the closest I came. Bard of High Renown says, since this movie is mostly shot on the Universal backlot, the diner is the exact same diner that appears in Back to the Future, so I have a headcanon where Streets of Fire is the timeline in Back to the Future 2 when evil Biff takes over Hill Valley. Ooh. You know, that's not a bad headcanon. Well, I mean, in that case, then I guess, you know, Back to the Future 2, that reality is just cooler because Streets of Fire looks so cool. Yeah, actually, in Back to the Future 2, do we see the Hill Valley Diner? I don't think we do. So it could check out. And honestly, the interesting thing about this is it means that when Biff kind of took over things, that he really invested in beefing up the city's train system because there's all those elevated trains in Streets of Fire. So maybe Biff running things wasn't so bad after all. Bry Guy, Illinois says, you forgot Amy Madigan being amazing as the ex-soldier who helps Cody. Her part wasn't even meant to be a woman, but she gave such a good audition, they rewrote the part and hired her. Yes, I think we've got at least like 2 or 3 comments being like, why didn't you talk about Amy Madigan as McCoy? So I want to be clear here. Amy Madigan is great in the movie. McCoy is a blast, a really cool character. The whole thing about, yes, that character was written as a man. You know, they changed the part for Amy Madigan. That's really cool. The reason, I should have mentioned her in the video, but the reason I didn't really focus on her is that the video is primarily about the opening 10 minutes and like the last 10 or 15 minutes. She's not in the opening 10 minutes at all. And in the last 10 minutes, she kind of very briefly appears right at the end. Like she drives over and, Tom Cody gets in the car with her, but she's not really a part of the opening or closing, which is what the video is about. So that's why I didn't really spend time talking about her. I should have mentioned her. That's on me. Amy Madigan, I'm sorry. You're great. Also great in Field of Dreams. Moving on. Mark Aquino says, there are so many music video directors who wouldn't be who they are now without this movie. I mean, yeah. You look at a lot of like 80s and 90s music videos, like the very like stylized videos back when music videos had real budgets, and it does look like Streets of Fire. I would love to hear what David Fincher thinks of this movie. It honestly, like the city in Seven, Always Raining, does not look far off from the Streets of Fire city. Yeah, I'd love to hear what like Dominic Senna thinks of this movie. But yeah, really, like Streets of Fire, you can see a big influence on music videos of the 80s and 90s, of just other movies, like the cities in like the Batman movies, all that kind of thing. Obviously the anime that I mentioned in the video, obviously like video games. For a movie that failed commercially, weirdly influential. Rixor, I never thought Cody looked old. He looked like someone who had been through shit. Like a soldier who had been to war and never come home. He's weathered, and it's that strain and stress he's endured that gives him the skills he needs to save Ellen. That's fair, but I think he looks old, and he definitely sounds old. I think he just seems like a guy who is not like 24. He's always seemed much older to me, but that's just me. This is all subjective. Tanaka Ricken says, me. This gives me big Bubblegum Crisis vibes. Patrick, minutes later, it inspired Bubblegum Crisis. There you go. And yeah, that's a thing that I think the creators of Bubblegum Crisis are like on the record saying like, oh yeah, this is like directly based on Streets of Fire. It also gives me big Repo the Genetic Opera vibes. That is one I cannot really speak to. I mean, based on the little bit that I know of that movie, like I can see the kind of stylistic crossover and similarities. Repo the Genetic Opera is one of those things that I think I was just the wrong age for when it came out. Like maybe if I was like 15, I would have been very into it, but like I was in college and I think I was like ew, no thanks. I'm not into that. I was like, I think you need to be more of like an emo teen to really click with Repo the Genetic Opera. And I missed that window, have not seen it. I don't know, should I see it? Like, if you really think that I need to see Repo the Genetic Opera, and it's weird that that came out around the same time as that movie Repo Men with Jude Law. Anyway, tell me. I don't know. No one has ever told me, Patrick, you gotta see this movie. But we're going to move on now. Space Tree Studios says, the good news is that the film has at least found a cult audience within the past decade or so. It got a 4K release about a year or so ago. The indie rock band The Proto-Men was influenced by it heavily to the point where the cover art for their second album is a direct homage to Streets of Fire. For some added context that might also help out why the movie didn't perform as well, at least partially, is that it came out at the worst possible time. One weekend after Temple of Doom, the same weekend as Star Trek 3, and the weekend before the 1-2 knockout punch of Gremlins and Ghostbusters. It stood no chance. Yeah, why was this released in the summer? I mean, I guess, it's like a fun action musical. Release it in the fall. Release it in the spring. But then, I don't know, back then these things were less predictable because it wasn't just all franchise movies. I mean, Temple of Doom, Star Trek, those are franchises. But the rest, they're all just original movies. In hindsight, yeah, obviously it was gonna get steamrolled by those other ones, but at the time, they're like, hey, we got this cool-looking movie, it's rated PG, from the director of other hit movies. Maybe it'll be huge. It was not huge. Also, Space Tree Studios says, and yes, Nowhere Fast and Tonight Is What It Means to Be Young are some of the greatest movie songs ever, and I would also like to acknowledge that Deeper and Deeper is underrated on the soundtrack. Yeah, I mean, the whole Streets of Fire soundtrack is terrific. If you have not heard it, I mean, if you haven't seen the movie, then see the movie. And then get the soundtrack. It's great. Ricky Diculous says, led by a young Willem Dafoe with his hair combed into some kind of demonic horn. Lol, the hairstyle is called a jelly roll. It's the same haircut that Wolverine has in the comics from his origin in the 1970s, during a time when 50s Americana was having a nostalgic moment. Okay, so I'm familiar with the jelly roll haircut, but I always think of that being a little bit more rounded when it comes forward. Dafoe's is so curled into this spike, this kind of curved horn. It looks to me more a weird variation on the jelly roll, but I don't know. I'm not an expert on 1950s hairstyles, but clearly, I mean, obviously we've talked about the 50s influence on the movie and, the greasers and all of that. So yes, I'm sure the jelly roll was the starting point for the hair and makeup team. Okay, Chub Stuff. Terrific name. Says, I watch your films on Nebula, and since I can't comment there, and my discretionary budget post-Nebula support doesn't allow me to support anyone on Patreon, I came here to say thank you for making me laugh and think so often. I bounce around watching various film critics, but you are the benchmark by which they are judged. That doesn't make me unique, but the fact that I'm nearing 70 years old and am not a personal friend of your parents at least makes me rare. Thanks for all your hard work and the hard work of all those who surround you. Wow! Well, Chub Stuff, thank you so much for watching. This is such a really nice comment. I gotta say, outside of my parents and friends of my parents, who they've told to watch the videos, I really did not know a lot of people in their late 60s were watching these, and that is really cool to hear. That's fantastic. This is great. I love this comment. I love that your name is Chub Stuff and that your profile picture is a bear. This is great. Sometimes comments are good. We have Maria Hutchison. I would argue the raid on Dafoe's hideout in the middle of the movie, from the striptease to One Bad Stud to Dafoe walking out of that wall of fire topless in his leather waders, is also a perfect stretch. Okay, there's more to the comment, but I'm going to address that part right here. I think that is, in terms of the middle section, the best stretch of the movie. That part is really cool. The one issue I've got with this section is, and this is something that Ryan, our editor, pointed out to me when he was editing the video, is that it's kind of strange that there isn't more of a moment between Tom Cody and Ellen Aim when they, like, meet again for the first time. Like, you've got the great part when Tom's, like, on the roof of the building across the street, and he sees her for the first time. And, you know, he kind of, like, flashes back, you know, to, like, memories. But then when he goes in to rescue her, and I know that he's, like, in a rush and everything, but he just, like, kicks in the door, grabs her, and they're out. And I wish we got, like, her reaction to her ex-boyfriend kicking in a door to rescue her when she's tied up. Again, I think the biggest failing of the movie really is, like, kind of the relationship between those two, and you know, you really want it to work more. And I think if there was more of a moment between the two when they meet again, then that would, like, elevate that entire stretch of the movie. But anyway, yes, that is a good point. Also, for the Patrick Replies video, how do you feel the way this builds out its world compares to how the John Wick films do? I feel like the approach is very similar. I think in terms of the world building, this is something that the John Wick movies do really well, and actually do better than Streets of Fire, because with John Wick, they kind of, like, keep giving you more about the world, where it's like, okay, it seems like he's just a sad guy, and then these punks, like, you know, steal his car, beat him up, kill his dog, and then you know, what's his face, Alfie Allen goes back home, and then it's like, oh, okay, this is his dad, and now we're seeing more of this, like, you know, he's some kind of, like, the head of this organized crime group. Then you've got the after John Wick kills all the guys in the raid on the house, then he calls the cleanup crew, paying with the gold coins. Then he goes to the Continental, and you keep learning more, and, like, every scene is bringing you deeper into this world and giving you a little like breadcrumbs about, like, what it actually is. And in Streets of Fire, I wish there was a little bit more world building, because the world looks so cool and all these aspects of it are so cool. In John Wick, you really understand how the world works and, like, what the hierarchy is. And I wish I knew a little bit more about it in Streets of Fire. That's it. Like, I think John Wick handles the world building really well, where they never waste time on exposition. But I would love it if again, like, I don't want like a big lore dumps. I just wish Streets of Fire had a little bit more world building. Like, tell me a little bit more about this city, because I love everything that's there. Simon Mano says, question. For a moment, I thought I hallucinated it, but rewatching the Jaws video, I saw that the next video after that one was supposed to be, what's the point of long takes? So, did something happen? Haha. I mean, this one was great, and I totally dig this way of remarking the qualities and awesomeness of not-so-good overall movies, but I still kind of wonder if the other video is going to come out at some point. Either way, thanks Patrick and team for all the great videos you put out. You truly are an inspiration. Okay, so in regards to the video, What's the Point of Long Takes, the video that was announced as being the follow-up to the Jaws episode, this is one of these things where I tried to, you know, notify as many people as possible. I tried to put this information out there and make sure everyone saw it. But, you know, there's only so much I can do. Basically, I wrote a Patreon post, like a public Patreon post. You don't need to be a member of the Patreon to read it. That's an update on a schedule change that we had happen. I posted it everywhere, you know, on Twitter, Instagram, as a YouTube community post. It's obviously on Patreon. And so I tried to spread it around so that everyone would see it, but I guess not everyone did. The short version is that we wrote the long takes video and we're getting ready to shoot it. And then the location that we were going to use was no longer available. And so we just postponed it until we can get a new location that works for it. But that's it. I mean, you know, not to be like, hey kids, sign up for the Patreon, but you know, that's a great way to get any updates about videos that I'm posting, because that's kind of like the best place to post them. Mars Hottentot says, I loved it when it came out as a teen. It's basically The Warriors as a retro futurist music video. The real problem is that there isn't enough Warriors elements in it. Yes. I agree. It should, you know, let's make it a little bit more like The Warriors. Did you know that the late Albert Pune, Cyborg, did a sequel with Paré called Road to Hell? Haven't seen it as it's almost impossible to find. Yes, I am aware of that sequel that apparently I hear is not great, but I haven't seen it. Have not seen the movie, so one of these days. There's still so many Albert Pyun movies that I need to see, and so maybe one day when I'm like going through his filmography, I'll get to Road to Hell. Okay, Dylan Meta says, very important question. Can this be reevaluated as the most 80s movie of all time? Love the video, by the way. Great work as always. No, I don't think so. While there are like aesthetic elements, obviously all the like smoke and neon, the general cinematography, and then, there's the soundtrack, the music. The movie does not have enough montages. It's not enough about like an ambitious protagonist trying to be the best. It doesn't have any like politics of the time. It does have 50s nostalgia, but like again, it earns some points on the 80s scale, but like it's not beaten Rocky IV. So, sorry. Jay Streckert says, hi, Patrick and Co. Love the channel and love that you feel the same way I do about Streets of Fire. I adore this movie, even though it has many, many flaws. One of the first things I most associate with it is bisexual lighting. While bisexual lighting is a 2010s trend, probably most associated with Blade Runner 2049 and John Wick, it seems to be an 80s inflected, like in the Black Mirror episode San Junipero. Streets of Fire, though, is an example of a movie with prominent bisexual lighting that's actually from the 80s. Patrick, do you have any kind of take on bisexual lighting as a trend or phenomena? Does it have a unifying meaning across films? Is it a played-out trend? Are there any similar lighting or coloration trends you can think of that are similar to or contrast with bi lighting? This video is fun. Keep up the good work. Okay, so the whole thing with bisexual lighting, if you're not familiar with it, but if you're watching YouTube video essays, you probably are. This is basically like colored lighting that using a lot of neon and especially leaning into blues and pinks and purples. I believe it was actually coined bisexual lighting. I think this was like a Tumblr thing originally, tied to scenes like lit using those colors. I believe in like Sherlock and Supernatural, of course, it would be those shows. We're all aware of the fandoms around those shows and shipping theoretically straight male characters. These were scenes in like nightclubs or whatever where characters are lit with these colors, and I think these are the colors of like the bisexual flag. But anyway, that's where the term came from, and obviously like aesthetically, the roots of this are in like 80s movies, which used a lot of neon. Like Michael Mann movies and Ridley Scott movies and Walter Hill movies. Movies that are generally like very straight movies. I mean, there's queer readings of everything. And actually, talking about Walter Hill now, I mean, I don't think it's that hard to do like a queer reading of The Warriors or 48 Hours. But obviously, when these directors, in the 80s were doing this kind of thing, they weren't intending it to be bisexual lighting. It just kind of, that's a very recent development. And so in the modern era, there are instances, of course, like San Junipero, which is a queer story. And I'm sure the lighting and color choices are chosen like for that reason. But I think a lot of it is just, it's just been, there's always trends in cinematography. And it's just been a trend in the past, 15 years to just pull more from, 80s neon lit stuff, like Nicholas Winding Refn movies, Drive, really brought back the neon noir aesthetic with the synth pop soundtrack. Only God Forgives looks like that as well. The John Wick movies. It's just neon has just been a trend. And then obviously with bisexual lighting, it really became a trend and then a cliche just in terms of video essays. The H-Bomber Guy plagiarism video has a great gag about bisexual lighting. But it's funny to me to look at Streets of Fire and say, yes, a movie full of bisexual lighting, when really at the time they were just kind of innovating with the use of neon and, colored gels on their lights to just do a cool new aesthetic that looks like a little bit futuristic. And that's really what it was. Anyway, I don't have any big take on bisexual lighting other than I think neon looks cool. Blade Runner looks cool. Michael Mann movies like Thief and Manhunter look like the coolest shit in the world. So Brad Rickson says, longtime channel watcher. This especially piqued my interest due to the fact I've never heard of this film and I should have. I have the movie on order, so cannot speak to it directly. Your observations suggest another question. Is the movie in need of an edit? Wonder if Hill was ever approached to do a director's cut. Has anyone else tried? First of all, I want to say it was really nice after this video came out. Just how many people on different platforms tagged me and said that they immediately ordered a Blu-ray or 4K of Streets of Fire after watching the video, and I was like, yes. I wish I was getting a cut of those, profits, but more importantly, I'm glad. I love it when people are watching the movies I'm talking about and buying physical media. I love those. Anyway, but onto this comment. Is the movie in need of an edit? Does it need a director's cut? I really think this is the director's cut. As much as the studio, did kind of push Hill to add the final musical number, Walter Hill doesn't seem to regret that. He seems very happy with the final musical number that they got. This does not seem to me like a movie that was meddled with by the studio a lot. I don't imagine there's a ton of extra footage on the cutting room floor. I don't think this was a 3-hour movie that was hacked down. Walter Hill tends to make pretty lean and mean movies. So no, I think this is Walter Hill's cut, and I don't know what would improve it from editing it very much. And as far as did Hill see Blade Runner? Yes. Blade Runner came out a couple of years before this. In the documentaries that are on the Blu-ray on 4K release, Walter Hill does definitely acknowledge that Blade Runner was just a stylistic influence, but also 48 Hours and The Warriors were already doing this kind of thing. Walter Hill was already into this vibe and this look and the use of neon in cities at night, before Blade Runner came out. So I don't think Blade Runner is that big an influence, just kind of a minor one. Kind of like how he mentions that Flashdance was a bit of an influence because it came out the year before. But yeah, Blade Runner, not a major influence, but a little influence. Jeffrey E. Petrone says, question. I've not seen Streets of Fire, but I know that the band The Blasters appear, and I dig them quite a lot. That is true. They play in the hideout for Willem Dafoe's biker gang. With that said, what are some of your favorite appearances of real, but can be in fictional settings, bands/musicians in a film? An example being the Feelies in Something Wild are the Yardbirds in Blow Up. Not a specific song, but perhaps more than one song. This is a general performance question. Okay, yeah, the Yardbirds in Blow Up is a really good one. That's great. But ultimately, I think the answer has to be Vanilla Ice in Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2, The Secret of the Ooze. An iconic scene that, will go down, I think has gone down as a landmark in cinema history. Wilk Gaufert, a classic username I don't know how to pronounce. Wilk Gaufert, sorry about that, says, plum, wood, mustard, and steel is a great color scheme for you. Thank you. That also sounds like a good name for a band. Plum, wood, mustard, and steel. So free band name. If anyone's got a 4-person band, you can all theme yourself after a thing. Plum, wood, mustard, and steel. There you go. You got it here. Comboose says, I somewhat frequently rewatch the first 20 to 25 minutes of Blade Runner 2049. The Dave Bautista scene, the Cells Within Cells scene, and the first scene with Ana de Armas. In my opinion, it's one of the best openings in all of cinema, although I can't articulate specifically why I find it so compelling. I don't often finish the movie, finding that my desires are satiated with, to use your words, the vibes of the setup of the movie without needing the payoff. I have 2 questions for Patrick Replies. The first is, are there any pieces of media, cinema or otherwise, where you find that you are content with only a portion of the story on rewatch? For example, watching serialized TV shows only to certain points or only a few issues of a comic storyline. Do you always feel compelled to finish once started? Okay, I'll take that first. So I mentioned in the video that I am just kind of obsessed with movie opening scenes. And so there are certain opening scenes that are often just like such a rush of energy, you know, like the first 5 minutes of Train Spotting, that I'll just like watch them for fun all the time. As far as longer, like more serialized things, I think the easy answer is there are some shows that should have just been a miniseries and then continued and became less good. You know, like the first season of Killing Eve is a phenomenal season of television, and then the second season is not as good. And did I even finish it? I never watched season 3. The season that Phoebe Waller-Bridge wrote is a great season, and even though it doesn't like fully wrap up the story, going back, I'm just like, yeah, I don't care about what comes after that first season. Broadchurch is like kind of maybe the definitive one where I think that is a really good miniseries. It's also the only thing that I've ever really liked that Chris Chibnall wrote. And then they made a second season, and it was bad. And I was like, what? There's no reason to keep this going. It was done, and now it's just getting dumber and more miserable. And I think there was a season 3 that I never watched. They made a second season of Big Little Lies, and I just never bothered with that because I was like, no, it was a great miniseries. We had a great time with it, and it ended and came to a conclusion, and there is no reason to continue that story. There you go. Second question. The second question is more of an industry-related question. I know that you've spoken at length about the issues with viewing everything as content, but does the industry moving in that direction give more opportunities to do short films as opposed to feature-length films? Since audiences are not paying movie ticket prices for those projects, they may be more willing to sit down and watch shorter content, which can obviously be made cheaper than a feature-length film. I think that there are stories and ideas that work better with a shorter runtime and would personally enjoy having more runtime variety to pick from. Okay, this is interesting to me because, and I actually think about this a lot, because short films are like a medium that people never really watch. Like, when do people watch short films? You know, like there will be short film blocks at film festivals, but most people don't go to watch those. Really, I think the only time most people see short films are like before a Pixar movie. And that's pretty much it. The short film is a weird medium because it's like, what is the best distribution platform for those? You're not going to put a 15-minute long movie in a theater and charge people full price. That doesn't work. And so really, like, streaming kind of works better as a distribution platform for things like that. You know, you look at the Netflix Wes Anderson Roald Dahl movies from last year that are all short films. And I mean, you know, I think it would have been cool if those were just like packaged and released like as a feature-length anthology, like in theaters, because Netflix didn't promote them very much. But I'm like, honestly, like if Wes Anderson wanted to make those, what is like another way that he would have gotten, you know, funding and distribution for those? Because like some of those are like 10 minutes long. So yeah, I do think what you're saying about like streaming and the like content industry, it might be a better way for people to get those kinds of like shorter projects funded. Short films are a weird thing because like we just don't watch them, and streaming kind of is like, you know, an ideal place to get them out there. JST25 says, "Hey Emma, hope you're doing well." I also hope Emma's doing well. 2 questions for Patrick. 1, how do you make a 35-minute video about Streets of Fire and not mention Amy Madigan's amazing performance as the spunky sidekick? She steals every scene and is the main piece of evidence that Paré's performance is not simply the result of bad writing. already addressed this. Yes, I know, I'm sorry, again, that I didn't talk more about Amy Madigan. 2, what are your thoughts on the movie The Adventures of Buckaroo Banzai, a movie that came out a mere 6 weeks after Streets of Fire? The two movies are incredibly similar, attempting to capture the aesthetic of comic books, MTV rock stardom, westerns, and serial radio programs of the past, and I'd argue that Buckaroo Banzai ends with the best instrumental track ever recorded for a film, the synth score playing as the protagonist walk through the LA flood control channel over the end credits. Personally, I enjoy the silly tone of Buckaroo Banzai over the serious Streets of Fire, mostly because I just can't get into the wooden dialogue that Hill wrote for Paré. I have always really enjoyed Buckaroo Banzai. I just saw it again at Nighthawk Cinema in Brooklyn in February. It is a blast. It is so fun. And especially the end credits with, that sequence of everyone walking and that the music is so good. It's one of the best. Is it the best end credits of all time? Probably. As far as which I prefer, I think I give a slight edge to Streets of Fire. Buckaroo Banzai is a movie where, I really like the movie. Especially as it goes on, it gets denser and denser and more, and it gets to a point where it's like you really barely understand what is happening since it's so weird and silly. My favorite parts of Buckaroo Banzai are kind of maybe the first 20 to 30 minutes, and then the end credits. The actual ending of the story is not quite as transcendent and cathartic as Streets of Fire. But yeah, it is another very weird movie that is very much a singular vision. It's just a great oddity of that time that I can't imagine would ever get made at any other point in time. I'm amazed it got made at all. But yeah, if you haven't seen The Adventures of Buckaroo Banzai Across the Eighth Dimension, it's a film you should check out. Untiny Dancer says, I loved this delightfully Incredibad movie. Thanks for featuring it. I think Incredibad is harsh. Okay, I think it's good. However, I think you missed two important details. Well, number one, the retro-futuristic look is actually a mashup of the 1950s and 1980s aesthetics, hair, clothes, car, signage, and even the music. It's an incredibly bonkers choice, which they pulled off really well. I mean, yes, it is a mashup of the 50s and 80s. I did mention the 50s influence on there, but there's aspects of it where the look of the diner and the elevated train, that all feels a little bit futuristic to me. Not flying cars and stuff, but it does feel a bit ahead of the 80s. That doesn't feel like current 80s to me. Also, number two, you failed to mention that Streets of Fire features both Robert Townsend and McKelty Williamson, which is just as amazing as seeing Soda Jerk Paxton and Weird Bagley Jr. But again, thank you for this episode. I love this movie and play its songs a lot. Honestly, I know now that Robert Townsend and McKelty Williamson are in the Sorrells, the R&B group in the movie. I did not know until very recently, until after I made the video, that was them. So that's why I failed to mention it, because I didn't know. Sorry. If this gets read in a Patrick Replies episode, could you expand on why Arnold Schwarzenegger is, as you put it, such an outlier as movie stars go? It's something you said offhand once, and I always wanted to hear more about it. I think it's fairly self-explanatory. Arnold Schwarzenegger was an Austrian bodybuilder with a thick accent who did not speak perfect English, who looked like a cartoon human, and the idea that he would become America's biggest movie star, both in action movies and comedies, I think is so strange and unexpected that, yeah, it's just a crazy thing that happened. That's really what it is. You look at all of their movie stars, and then you look at Arnold Schwarzenegger, and it's yeah, there's a real difference there. It's a weird thing that happened, and I think he is a bit of an outlier. Honestly, good for him for doing what most people would have said was impossible. Alden Tuttle says, "Hi, Emma and Patrick. I oddly have this feeling about Guy Ritchie's Wrath of Man, which is a remake of the French film Cash Truck. For 50 minutes or so, it's the greatest movie ever made. I love the third act and first 20 minutes with Statham. This comment will not end up on Patrick Replies." Well, Alden, here it is. I guess you were wrong. And I'm just going to say, I think Wrath of Man is quite good. I really enjoyed it when I saw it in theaters. It also has my boy Josh Hartnett as a character named Boy Sweat Dave, one of the great character names of our time. Chip Watford says, "Hi Patrick and Emma. Have you seen Hundreds of Beavers? And if so, what did you think about it? It is currently my favorite film of 2024 so far. I have seen Hundreds of Beavers, and I think it's amazing. I loved it, and you should follow me on Letterboxd because, if you did, then you would have seen that I reviewed it months ago. And so, yeah, I think it rules. If you haven't seen Hundreds of Beavers, it is like nothing else you'll see this year. It is incredible. I could not recommend it more highly. Yu-Gi-Oh! Common Sentai Ran. "Hi, Emma and Patrick. I paused this video to go watch the opening scene and the last scene, and I have to admit, it looks like a classic movie from the 80s that should have become a popular franchise." Exactly. It is also interesting to see Robert Townsend in another music-related film. Once again, sorry that I didn't know it was Robert Townsend. And now I'm off to Nebula to watch the bonus video. However, who would you cast if you were in charge of remaking this film today? Also, any filmmaking tips because I am working on a short film. Okay, first part, who would you cast if you were in charge? So actually, I'm just gonna steal other people's ideas. I remember several years ago, was this like back when A Star is Born came out? But I remember on Twitter, I think it was Ben David Grubinski, said that Bradley Cooper and Lady Gaga should star in a Streets of Fire remake. And obviously they're much older than the characters are in the original, so you'd have to change things. But I mean, that would be great. I think those two would be awesome in this kind of movie together. I also think just casting a real life pop star as Ellen Aim, would be really cool. So yeah, I think they would be cool. Also, I'm forgetting. I'm sorry who just mentioned this recently. But someone on Twitter recently said, "What about Austin Butler and Rachel Zegler?" And I'm like, that would also be cool. That would be cool. I'd watch it with them. So, yeah, there's more options. Really, I mean, what if Streets of Fire became like A Star is Born, where every 20 years they remade it again with new people? That would be great. They should do that. And okay, also any filmmaking tips because I'm working on a short film. Okay, so you already mentioned that you have a Nebula account. So on Nebula, in the Nebula classes section, you can see 2 years ago, I made a whole Nebula class that, is it like 80 minutes long? It's definitely over an hour. But a whole class called How to Make a Movie that has basically every bit of filmmaking advice that I could give out. So go watch that. And I hope it helps maybe a little bit. Maybe I think there's some good advice in there. But anyway, best of luck with the short film. Have a great shoot. And we are done with the YouTube comments. Okay. So now it is over to the questions from the Ask Patrick channel on our Discord server. Now, I must say what I say every single time. We have a Discord server, which is available exclusively to members of the Patreon. And so if you join the Patreon, it supports the channel, helps us, fund the videos, pay the team that works on them. And also, there's other benefits, but also you can join the Discord and hang out there and, chat about movies or whatever. And there's an Ask Patrick channel where if you submit a question about the latest video, I will answer it in one of the Patrick Replies videos. So that's what we're doing right now. Let's see what we got. Okay, our first Discord question comes from the King of Doma, who says, "Ooh, new ep. And of course, a question immediately comes to mind, Rick Moranis retrospective when? One thing I do just want to mention here about Rick Moranis is I feel like sometimes in the videos we will write dialogue for Emma that implies that, she might not know things that she actually does know or have opinions she doesn't really have. And Emma has seen some of those Rick Moranis movies. I believe Emma has seen Little Shop of Horrors at the very least, maybe Ghostbusters. I'm not positive. But anyway, just want to let everyone know that Emma has seen Rick Moranis movies. But as far as a retrospective, probably not. I don't know how serious this question is, but could just be a joke. But we all love Rick Moranis. Who doesn't? But on this channel, we don't tend to do actor retrospectives as much as we do director ones. And so it is unlikely. It's unlikely that I will do that. But if anyone else wants to make that video, I'll watch it. King of Doma is back again. Also, this flick seems ripe for a remake because my personal opinion about remakes is that they should be focused on mediocre films with great premises. Thoughts on casting for a 2024 reboot? We already covered this. Pinball Witch says, absolutely loved the Streets of Fire episode. I let out an audible ooh when the 80s look kicked in. Great work from everyone involved. I am one of the people Streets of Fire was made for, but I also came to it in a bit of a different way, one I wanted to share. You mentioned the popularity in Japan, as well as Hill's other film, The Warriors, and its video game adaptation, but did you know those two films are almost single-handedly responsible for an entire subgenre of action video games known as beat-em-ups? Games like the Double Dragon and Streets of Rage games, the TMNT arcade games, and the long-running Kunio-kun River City games all exist because of them. It's one of my favorite genres of games, and that's how I was introduced to the film. This is a thing that I'm vaguely aware of. I have read this before, but and I did play some of those games when I was a kid, but I'm not an expert on the exact connection between Streets of Fire and The Warriors and beat-em-up games. Oh, also, I listen to the soundtrack regularly, and multiple songs are on my personal mix, Fake Bands, Great Songs, which obviously opens with Nowhere Fast. Pinball Witch, drop the link to the Spotify playlist. Okay, Torpedo Beetle says, I really enjoyed the Streets of Fire video, and I'm not ashamed to admit that I immediately started belting out the lyrics to How Silly Can You Get from the classic Kilm Top Secret as soon as it was mentioned. I'm really fascinated by this first 5, last 20 idea, and I think putting Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom into that bucket is what really solidified the concept for me. It's a heavily flawed film, but those flaws are mostly confined to the middle hour, and now I think I have a better way to articulate part of why I love the movie despite that. I also think it's interesting to contrast Temple of Doom with the last 2 Indiana Jones movies, Kingdom of the Crystal Skull and Dial of Destiny. I watched them back-to-back last summer, and their issues are almost the opposite of each other. Despite the hatred the fridge scene gets, I think the first third of Kingdom is pretty strong, but the second half is a disaster. Dial of Destiny has a really weak opening and extremely middling middle, but the last 20 minutes is way more fun than anything that came before. Maybe there's decent movies somewhere between the two of them. If Kingdom had managed to stick the landing with the last 20 minutes, or if Dial had an opening that grabbed me, I think they would have left a much stronger impression without needing to rework the not great middle sections. Are there any other prominent first 5, last 20 movies, or movies with a strong opening or ending that could have been classics but are let down by the rest of the runtime? I do want to talk about the Indiana Jones thing for a second, because I generally agree that the opening, maybe 30-ish minutes of Crystal Skull is generally good. I mean, I wish there wasn't the CGI groundhog at the beginning that right away kind of starts things off on a sour note where you're like, okay, there's going to be more of this. And obviously that continues as the movie goes on. But I think the best part of Crystal Skull is the car motorcycle chase through the college campus, but also generally the opening Area 51 stuff I think is good. A point that I read last year, I believe it was in an article Mike Ryan wrote for Uprocks, that I think is really interesting, is that obviously the nuke the fridge thing where, Indy survives nuclear blast by hiding in a lead-lined fridge. was very controversial at the time. And the thing that Mike Ryan wrote is that in general, Indiana Jones movies will have like a really crazy, impossible thing happen, but it's almost always like at the end of the movie, like in the third act. And he theorized, and I think I agree with him, that if the fridge nuclear bomb scene happened like at the climax, then people, would have been way more okay with it. But because it's a really crazy thing that happens like right at the start, right away that's like, this is a bit much for now. And then obviously a lot of like dumb, silly stuff happens in the rest of the movie. But yeah, in general, I think the opening is mostly quite solid to good. And then it just goes downhill from there. And then in Dial of Destiny, I agree, the opening, like flashback with the de-aging, not good. And actually, my favorite part of Dial of Destiny is the New York section, which it's weird that my favorite part of these Indiana Jones movies are the parts in America, not all the globetrotting adventure stuff. As far as the end of Dial of Destiny goes, I will say, like, I think Dial of Destiny is like mediocre. It's likely that I will never watch it again. I didn't hate it, but like, I don't think it's especially good or interesting. But obviously the climax with the spoilers, time travel, is, I think, the most interesting thing in the movie, but it happens so late that when it happened, I was like, oh, I kind of wish, this could have happened earlier. Like, I wish the movie had gotten interesting earlier. My huge issue with the last 20 minutes of Dial of Destiny is just that in the climax, Indy doesn't get to make a decision in the end. Like, he wants to stay in the past and then gets knocked out and dragged to the present. And I'm like, you're really going to end the series with our protagonist not being allowed to make a choice for himself? That's weird. And not satisfying. But yeah, I do think you're onto something with the funny thing about how like these movies seem to be like, one's better at the beginning, one's better at the end. Obviously you can't edit them into one movie. That would make no sense. But I don't know. I don't have any big opinion on this, but like, it's just fun to think about. Okay, moving on. Half Gemini says, such a great video. Thank you. I knew the movie, but none of the context and commentary. You and team are as thoughtful as ever. The era lighting and costume changes were terrific, and the Peter Gabriel synth flourishes, chef's kiss. I will say, the Peter Gabriel synth flourishes, that was something that I think it was Jake's idea, and then we added that in, I think, like an hour before I exported the video. That was the most last-minute final thing that we put in, so I'm glad people liked it because it could not have been a more last-minute decision. For Patrick, since this film didn't get Tom Cruise, what is your favorite missed casting opportunity? Even if apocryphal, I can't help but wonder what David Bowie would have done with Elrond. Can you imagine if he had sung something Elvish for the soundtrack? That would be cool. The missed casting opportunity that I will never stop thinking about for as long as I live, even if I think it would have made the movie worse, is if Will Smith had starred in The Matrix. That just sounds so strange. Like, that was the era when he was still doing, songs for movie soundtracks. Like, he did Wild Wild West instead of The Matrix and did a song. What would the Will Smith Matrix song be? I'm sure people have heard me talk about this before, but this is why we put a whole gag about Will Smith in The Matrix in Night of the Coconut, because I'll never stop thinking about it. Q-Ball says, loved the video. Your passion and love for Streets of Fire really shone through, and I'm excited to check the movie out. You mentioned that you were fascinated by movie openings. Off the top of your head, what are 5 you think are especially great or really love? So I already mentioned Trainspotting. Trainspotting is way up there. The Matrix has to be up there. The first, 10 minutes of that movie, astounding. Once Upon a Time in the West, that's got to be up there. The Social Network, that's got to be up there. 2001: A Space Odyssey, that's a pretty good one. Goodfellas, Scream. This is more than 5. There are so many great openings. I also love the ones that open with these big showy flourishes of like a huge oneer, like Touch of Evil or Bonfire of the Vanities or Snake Eyes, the Brian De Palma movie, which starts with like a 20-minute long shot. I don't know. Openings are great. I could talk about this forever. I feel like I'm starting to lose my voice, and so I should wrap this up soon. Okay, we got a few of these left. Let's see. Bethany Laurel says, "Hi, Patrick and Emma. By the way, Emma, I love your shirt in the video." Hell yeah, shout out to Emma's shirt. "I'm also obsessed with Streets of Fire and how it doesn't quite all work. I have 2 questions for the Replies video. 1, other than Tom Cruise, who would your choice have been to play Tom Cody? Looking at the cast of The Outsiders, Patrick Swayze, I think, could have been very good. Maybe Judd Nelson? I know a downgrade from Tom Cruise, but I think he's got the right vibe for it. Could Emilio Estevez have done it? No, I don't think so. I think he's a little too pouty. What about Michael J. Fox? Like, he was still, on sitcoms at the time. Is he too funny? Yeah, I think he's probably too funny. Sean Penn? Potentially? Yeah, maybe Sean Penn. That would have been interesting. But yeah, I'm going to say Swayze, Judd Nelson, Sean Penn. Number 2, where do Nowhere Fast and Tonight Is What It Means to Be Young fall in your ranking of Jim Steinman's oeuvre? I think it's largely because of just, the Streets of Fire connection, but I think they might be my favorite Jim Steinman songs. Like, I am going to say, as far as Steinman goes, and people are like Steinman people. I'm not like a Steinman person. I enjoy a bunch of Jim Steinman songs, and I really enjoy them here, like, in a cinematic context. But I prefer his songs sung by female vocalists to, like, the Meatloaf ones. Nothing against Meatloaf. That's just my personal taste. I think Original Sin is way up there in my rankings. We put it in Night of the Coconut. We were able to, legally use it. Not the version that he re-recorded for the soundtrack to The Shadow by Taylor Dane. But we used the original Sin version. But yeah, I think these are my favorite Jim Steinman songs. That's maybe a hot take, that it's not like Total Eclipse of the Heart, but there you go. Goss in the House says, "Hey Patrick, I'm already seeing a lot of thought-provoking questions, so I'll provide a slightly sillier one. If you had to pick another movie starring Willem Dafoe to end in a sledgehammer duel, which would it be? My personal vote, Speed 2, Cruise Control. I'm gonna say Antichrist." Sam Aronow says, "Hey Patrick, I've had a lot of thoughts on Peter Biskind for the past 2 weeks, and I'm hoping it's not too late. I was required to read Easy Rider's Raging Bulls for my last film class before graduation, and as much as Biskind tries to blame Spielberg and Lucas for ruining everything, my reading of the book actually made the strongest possible case that the blockbuster 80s were really just a steady, logical evolution of the auteur-driven 70s. The tones and visual aesthetics may have changed, but ultimately both eras were dominated by big-budget productions helmed by powerful auteur filmmakers with tons of clout. Think back to your Dick Tracy video. And neither period was devoid of either big dumb action or adult-facing cinema. Think back to your mention of Rain Man being the biggest movie of its year." Yes, I totally agree. Reading Easy Rider's Raging Bulls, as much as Biskind does seem to bemoan how and then after the 70s, cinema became trash. He does really kind of lay out why it happened. Basically, you did have all these incredible filmmakers making these really interesting, unique, artistic films where they had total control. And then what basically happened is a lot of these filmmakers, their egos went to their heads, their, productions went out of control, and they basically ran their careers into the ground. And so this isn't good, but you look at Heaven's Gate and Sorcerer and various Altman productions, and you get why these directors kind of became like maniacs. It's not just that they like didn't make money. It's that, these people just like became like nightmares to work with, and they like fired their producers and produced the movies themselves. I mean, like Biskin says in the book, he uses the quote from Easy Rider, "We blew it." It sucks that they brought it on themselves and couldn't kind of like rein themselves in. And you also get why Spielberg and Lucas managed to then succeed into the 80s, because they were two of like the only guys who kind of didn't become like egomaniacal monsters and seemed relatively nice and like, good to work with. It's a really interesting book, and it's really interesting to see that entire era just kind of like laid out there, and it really makes you understand why things went the way they did. Oh, and here's another question about Easy Rider's Raging Bulls. Gustavo Moriera says, "Hello, Patrick. I have noticed in the last couple of videos some vitriol thrown into Biskin's book, Easy Rider's Raging Bulls. As a person with some casual interest in the production and behind-the-scenes stories of Hollywood movies and studios, I always thought of it as a pretty great chronicle to understanding the changes the industry underwent through the Vietnam years, and was not aware that, for many people I respect and have studied the topic a lot more than me, his writing was seen as, to put it candidly, deeply biased. My questions to you are, why do you think it is not a good source of research on the topic? Are there omissions or falsehoods in it that stick up to you, or is it more a difference of opinion on some subject? Also, what books or authors would you recommend to get more versed in the industry's history, especially the production side of it? Finally, I would like to congratulate you on the quality of your work. Your videos are always insightful, eloquent, and entertaining, and they are a good source of appreciation for the amount of thought that goes into pretty much every decision of the movie-making process that we many times take for granted. Sorry about the language. English is not my native tongue. First of all, Gustavo, thank you so much. That is so kind, and also your English seems great. Like this all is like very eloquent and totally makes sense. I will say, let me clarify about Easy Rider's Raging Bulls. I think it's a terrific book. It's really fun. It's really interesting. I think it does paint a very clear picture of like why and how the industry changed. It wasn't vitriol that I threw at it in the videos, and I didn't want it to like come off that way. Basically, what I meant is that it is a book that many people written about in the book, and this applies to other books that Biskin has written. Many people written about in these books do take issue with and push back against both their presentation and just, some of the information in there. Spielberg has said that like everything about me in that book is a lie. I'm not sure everything is. I know Roger Ebert has a story that you can read about online about a story that Biskin wrote about, and I think his book about Miramax, that Ebert is like, that straight up didn't happen. That is not how that event occurred at all. So I think it's one of these things where, like, in the books, he does have tons and tons of firsthand sources. He interviewed like a million people. My read on it is that most of it is generally true. But sometimes, one person that he talks to, maybe their take on something is like a little bit skewed, and they have their own opinion and agenda. And also Biskin has his own agenda. So my take is that it's a terrific book that I would highly recommend everyone interested in film history should read. It's just that take some of it with a grain of salt, and be like, maybe not absolutely everything here, because, it's all apocryphal. Maybe not everything here necessarily happened exactly as written about. That's all it is. No, I like the book a lot. Okay, Rabbi Perfected says, just finished the new videos, and may I say that, as always, you've delivered. Thank you. I was a kid when Streets of Fire came out, haven't seen it since the 80s, so your video has me putting it into my viewing list for a refresh. I was surprised that Danger Zone didn't make the list in the bonus video, as it might be the quintessential Giorgio Moroder song. However, that's not the question, as I know you're not a fan of why didn't X make the list queries, but just felt compelled to mention it. I'm actually curious why you didn't make note that both Judy Garland and Liza Minnelli made the list. That's pretty remarkable that mother and daughter both represented. Yeah, that is a good point. They both made it on the list. That is cool that mother and daughter are both on there. I mean, Judy's on there twice. Why didn't I mention it? Well, the thing is, that video was not scripted. That was me sitting in an apartment in Oslo, just kind of rambling for a while. And so look, those videos are not going to be as intelligent as the regular scripted main episodes. So yeah, I don't know. I probably should have mentioned it, but I'm stupid. But I will say, so many people on Twitter and Reddit and other places did think it was crazy that I did not include Danger Zone on the list. I will say that Danger Zone was like an honorable mention. It came so close to making the list. But at the end of the day, I think, especially in terms of how it's used in the movie, I think What a Feeling is better. What a Feeling both opens and closes Flashdance. It has more of an emotional impact. It plays at the climax of the movie. And then Call Me by Blondie from American Gigolo, I just think is a better song. Sorry, but I think Blondie is better than Kenny Loggins. Also, I will say, I think quintessential Giorgio Moroder's song is maybe like I Feel Love by Donna Summer. Something like the disco stuff he was doing before movies. But yeah, Danger Zone is great. Do not get me wrong. Danger Zone, fantastic. But also, even about Top Gun songs, the way that Take My Breath Away is used, I think is so integral to that movie's success. Because that song, the way that they play it, they play the beginning of it multiple times, but they don't play it in full until Tom Cruise and Kelly McGillis finally, kiss and have their love scene. And just, the prolonged payoff of the full song, I think is so great. So yeah, sorry Danger Zone isn't on there. It was a close call. There were a lot of good songs. It was a tough choice. And anyway, that is the end of the video. Thank you for watching. I will hopefully be back shooting these in my apartment soon. That is all for now. Good night.